Step out.
Am I being detained?
Hands where I can see them.
My hands are visible.
Don't play lawyer. Last warning.
Choose carefully.
This is the moment that will cost him everything. Before the night is over, this officer will lose his badge, his career, and the quiet protection of the institution he believed would always shield him. Federal prosecutors will later circle this footage like sharks. Civil attorneys will attach price tags measured in millions, and a single, irreversible question will hang over his future. Why did you pull your gun when no threat existed? Because what unfolds here isn't a misunderstanding. It's a collision between unchecked ego and unmovable dignity. The officer doesn't know who he's dealing with, not yet, or maybe he does, and that's exactly the problem. The patrol car rolls to a stop under sterile streetlights. No sirens now, no urgency, just the heavy silence that comes when authority expects obedience. The officer approaches already decided. His posture is rigid, chin slightly raised. This isn't curiosity, it's control, calculated, predatory. Inside the vehicle sits a black man in a tailored suit, calm to the point of unsettling. His voice never rises, his breathing never changes. He doesn't fidget. That calmness, measured, deliberate, is read not as compliance, but as insolence. This is the first dangerous moment for the officer's career, because the moment he mistakes composure for defiance, he stops policing behavior and starts policing ego. Step out of the vehicle. No explanation, no legal basis, just expectation. The subject doesn't refuse. He asks a question. That question is a trigger. Am I being detained? For officers who respect the law, it's routine. For officers who see the law as a tool rather than a boundary, it feels like an attack. The officer's jaw tightens. His authority has been questioned in public under a camera that never forgets. This is where arrogance begins to metastasize. The subject's dignity becomes a mirror, reflecting something the officer doesn't want to see: bias. Not shouted, not explicit, but embedded. The assumption that this man's confidence must be counterfeit, that calm must be arrogance, that a black man asserting rights must be playing games. The officer escalates with tone before he escalates with force. Don't play lawyer with me. But the subject doesn't flinch. I am a lawyer. Not bragging, not threatening, a statement of fact. And now the officer is trapped, because every second from this point forward is radioactive. He has been warned, politely, that the man in front of him understands the law better than he does. If the stop is clean, there's no danger. If it's dirty, everything he does next becomes evidence. This is why this moment is lethal for his career. He could de-escalate, he could explain, he could reset. Instead, he doubles down. Hands where I can see them. The subject's hands are already visible. Everyone knows it. The camera knows it. But the command isn't about safety. It's about reclaiming dominance, about reasserting who gets to speak and who must submit. The subject responds with precision, not emotion. My hands are visible. Your tone isn't lawful. That sentence lands like a scalpel, because now it's not just about the stop. It's about conduct. The officer hears something else entirely. You're being watched. You're being measured. And you're losing. His body language shifts. His shoulders square. His voice sharpens. This is no longer policing. This is personal. You think your suit makes you untouchable? There it is. The hidden power dynamic surfaces. The resentment, the assumption, the belief that status, when worn by the wrong person, must be challenged. The subject doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't insult. He doesn't threaten. I think your badge doesn't make you right. That line will be replayed in court, because in that moment, dignity becomes a weapon. Calm becomes resistance. And the officer feels it slipping. Control, narrative, dominance. This is the most dangerous point yet. When an officer feels their authority questioned and their identity threatened, they don't escalate logically. They escalate emotionally. Training gives way to instinct. Policy gives way to pride. Last warning. A warning for what? The subject hasn't moved, hasn't shouted, hasn't disobeyed. The warning exists to justify what comes next, and the subject knows it. Then choose your next move carefully. Not a challenge, a reminder. A reminder that this body cam doesn't belong to the officer, that this moment doesn't belong to him either, that somewhere beyond these streetlights are federal statutes, civil rights laws, and prosecutors who specialize in moments just like this. The officer's hand drifts just slightly toward his weapon. That movement is subtle, but it changes everything, because drawing or threatening lethal force without cause isn't just misconduct. It's a felony. It's deprivation of rights under color of law. It's the kind of decision that follows you into depositions, indictments, and prison cells. And as the tension spikes, something crackles over the radio. A flag. A name just came back. The officer freezes, not because he's calming down, but because for the first time, uncertainty pierces the armor of his arrogance. Unit 12, the dispatcher says, voice suddenly careful. Confirm. You're with... The officer cuts his eyes back to the man in the car and realizes this stop may have just summoned the end of his career. The radio doesn't raise its voice, but it doesn't need to. The pause alone is enough. Unit 12, confirm you're with... The dispatcher begins again, slower now, more deliberate. That hesitation is the sound of a system waking up. The officer doesn't respond immediately. His eyes flick to the body cam, then back to the man in the driver's seat. The suit, the posture. The calm that hasn't cracked once. What looked like defiance moments ago now reads as something else entirely. Certainty. This is the next dangerous moment for the officer's career, because once doubt enters, every aggressive move that came before starts to look intentional. The subject speaks first, voice steady, almost courteous. You may want to listen to the radio. No gloating, no smirk, just an invitation. The dispatcher finishes the sentence. Confirm you're with the United States Attorney General. Silence. Not cinematic silence, not dramatic music silence. The kind of silence where a man realizes the rules he thought were flexible have just snapped back into place. The officer swallows. His jaw tightens again, but now it's not anger. It's calculation. Damage control. The body cam is still rolling. The gun is still too close to being justified. And every second he stands here armed, agitated, and wrong compounds the consequences. This is why this moment is catastrophic. Because federal officials don't get treated as civilians in hindsight. They get treated as protected persons. And every command, every tone shift, every micro-escalation is about to be reviewed not by internal affairs, but by the Department of Justice. The subject doesn't announce his title again. He doesn't need to. Power, real power, doesn't repeat itself. I've complied with every lawful order, he says. I've asked for a reason. I haven't received one. The officer exhales sharply through his nose. He finally steps back half a pace, just enough to look like de-escalation, not enough to admit error. Dispatch, stand by, he mutters into the radio. That line will haunt him later, because you don't put this situation on hold. You escalate up, not stall down. Standing by isn't procedure, it's avoidance. It's the instinct to keep control of a situation that has already slipped beyond you. This is where bias becomes undeniable. If the man in the car were anyone else, white, less composed, less articulate, the officer might still be posturing. But now that the subject's identity threatens consequences above the department, the officer's aggression begins to retreat, not because he was wrong, but because he might be caught. The subject notices it immediately. The shift, the softening edge, the recalibration. Officer, he says calmly, am I being detained? Same question as before, but now it lands differently. This is why this moment is dangerous, because the officer already escalated without cause. Answering now forces him to confront that reality. "No," the officer says too quickly. Just sorting something out." Just. That word will be dissected in court, because just doesn't explain why a firearm was threatened, just doesn't justify commands issued without cause, just doesn't erase tone, posture, or intent. The subject nods once. "Then I'm going to remain in my vehicle," he says, "and I'd like a supervisor." There it is, the formal line. This is where careers begin to unravel, not with handcuffs, but with oversight. The officer hesitates. Calling a supervisor means witnesses. It means another badge watching the footage live. It means the story no longer belongs to him. But refusing now would be indefensible. "Supervisor en route," he finally says into the radio, clipped and controlled. The subject doesn't thank him. He doesn't need to, because the power dynamic has flipped completely. Minutes pass, long ones. The officer paces a short arc near the patrol car, careful not to drift too far from frame. His movements are restrained now, almost rehearsed. He checks his belt, adjusts his vest. Everything about him says, look professional, but professionalism after aggression reads as performance. This is another lethal moment, because investigators don't just look at what happened, they look at when behavior changed. And here, the timeline is damning. Calm appears only after identity is revealed. Respect arrives only after consequence becomes real. The subject waits, hands still visible, posture unchanged. His calm is unshakable, not passive, but intentional. He knows something the officer doesn't want to admit yet, that the footage already tells the story. A second patrol car arrives, then a third. Lights, but no sirens. A supervisor steps out, older, slower, eyes already narrowed, not at the subject, but at his own officer. They exchange a look that says, "What did you do?" The supervisor approaches the subject first. "Sir," he says, voice measured, respectful. "I'm Sergeant Miller. I understand there's been a concern." The subject nods. "There has," he replies. "I was stopped without explanation, escalated without cause, and threatened without justification." Each phrase is deliberate. Each one maps cleanly to policy violations, to statutes, to charges. The supervisor listens. Really listens. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't defend. That tells you everything. Because if this were clean, he'd already be pushing back. Instead, he turns to the officer. "Did you draw your weapon?" The officer stiffens. "I didn't draw," he says. "I prepared." Prepared. Another word that will collapse under scrutiny. "For what?" the supervisor asks. The officer opens his mouth. Nothing comes out. That silence is louder than any argument, because now it's no longer the subject versus the officer. It's the officer versus the record. The supervisor exhales, slow and controlled. "Officer," he says, "step back to my vehicle." Not a suggestion, a command. And as the officer obeys, head lowered, shoulders tight, the reality finally sets in. This stop is no longer about authority, it's about accountability. And as the supervisor reaches for his radio, preparing to make a call that will trigger internal investigations, federal reviews, and years of legal fallout. The bodycam keeps recording. And the most damaging part of this encounter hasn't even been said yet. The supervisor's radio call is quiet, but it detonates everything. "Command, this is Sergeant Miller. I need internal affairs notified. Possible rights violation. Bodycam active." The officer hears it from 10 feet away. And for the first time tonight, he understands the scale of what he's facing. This is the point of no return, because internal affairs isn't summoned for misunderstandings. They're called when the department needs distance, when the institution prepares to cut one of its own loose to protect itself. The officer's face drains of color. His earlier confidence, sharp, dominant, unyielding, has collapsed into something brittle. He doesn't argue. He doesn't posture. He stands still, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the asphalt like it might open up and swallow him whole. This is why this moment is fatal to his career. Not because he made a mistake, but because the department has decided it can't defend him. The supervisor turns back to the subject. "Sir," he says, "you are free to go. I apologize for the conduct you experienced tonight." Apology. Another word that carries weight, because apologies become admissions when lawyers replay them frame by frame. The subject nods, dignified as ever. "I'll be cooperating fully," he says. "So will my office." He doesn't threaten. He doesn't need to. Everyone here understands what that sentence means. Federal oversight, subpoenas, investigators who don't ask for favors and don't accept excuses. This isn't going to be buried in paperwork or softened by union reps. This is going to be public. The subject starts his engine slow and deliberate. No rush, no anger, just control. As he pulls away, the officer watches him go, not with resentment now, but with something closer to dread. Because the power dynamic has reversed completely, the man he tried to dominate is leaving untouched. The man with the gun is staying behind. This is another critical danger point, because what happens after the subject leaves is often more revealing than the stop itself. The supervisor turns to the officer again. "Hand me your weapon." The officer looks up sharply. "Sergeant?" "Now." There's no anger in the supervisor's voice. No theatrics, just finality. The officer hesitates, just long enough to be noticed, then unholsters his firearm and hands it over, grip first. The metal clicks softly as it leaves his belt. That sound will echo in his memory, because surrendering a weapon isn't disciplinary yet, but it's symbolic. It means trust has been suspended. It means the department is already bracing for what the footage shows. The supervisor gestures toward the patrol car. "Sit." The officer complies. This is where the illusion of authority fully collapses. Minutes later, another unit arrives, unmarked this time. Two plainclothes investigators step out. Their demeanor is different. No small talk, no pleasantries. They already know what they're here for. One of them taps the body cam. "We'll take the footage," he says. The officer doesn't respond, because he knows something they don't need to tell him yet, that the camera didn't just record what he said, it recorded why he said it. Tone, timing, escalation. The precise moment respect appeared, only after identity did. The invisible line between policing and prejudice crossed without hesitation. This is where intent becomes unavoidable. In the coming weeks, analysts will slow the footage down, frame by frame. They'll isolate the moment his hand moved toward his weapon. They'll freeze the second his voice sharpened. They'll compare how he spoke before the radio call and after. And a pattern will emerge, not of danger, but of bias. That pattern is what federal prosecutors build cases on. The officer is escorted to the station, not arrested, not yet, but separated, processed, logged. His badge is placed in an evidence bag. Not ceremonially, not angrily, just efficiently. Another lethal milestone, because badges don't go into evidence unless someone expects charges. Outside the station, news spreads fast, too fast. A call leaks, then another. A name circulates, then a title. By morning, the footage is already being requested. By afternoon, it's being demanded. And by evening, it's everywhere. Commentators don't argue about what happened. They argue about how long it took to happen, about how many times this same pattern played out without consequence, about how many men didn't have a title to protect them. The officer sits alone in an interview room, staring at a scuffed table. His union rep hasn't arrived yet. His phone is silent. This is when the weight finally lands. Not fear of losing the job. That's already gone. But the realization that this isn't just administrative. This is criminal. Federal statutes don't care about excuses. They care about deprivation of rights, about abuse of authority, about whether a reasonable officer would have acted the same way. And here, reasonableness died the moment ego took control. Outside, the Department of Justice opens a file. Inside, the officer rubs his hands together, a nervous habit he didn't know he had. He whispers to himself, barely audible, "I didn't mean it like that." But intent isn't measured by meaning. It's measured by action. And the action is already on record. The body cam is still rolling somewhere, paused, copied, archived, waiting to be played again in a courtroom where tone matters, silence speaks, and arrogance carries a sentence. And the next voice the officer hears won't be a supervisor's. It will be a federal prosecutor's, asking one question, the same one that started everything. Why did you escalate?